They say you don't know what you have until it's gone. I learned that the hard way. I had it all, a loving husband, amazing kids, and a stable life. But beneath the surface of that perfect picture, something was missing. Restlessness crept in, and I made choices that shattered everything I held dear. My husband, my children, my family. They were all caught in the fallout of my mistakes. Now, years later, I live with the weight of what I've done, trying to rebuild something I may never get back. This is the story of how one decision changed everything, and what it's like to live with the regret that follows. On the outside, my life was the picture of perfection. A stable home, a fulfilling career, and a marriage that had weathered 2 decades of life's ups and downs. My husband, Mark, was everything a woman could ask for. Loving, attentive, and a constant source of support. Together, we had built a life that many envied, raising 2 children who were our pride and joy. Every holiday, every celebration, every mundane weekday felt like part of a dream I didn't dare question. But beneath the surface, something was changing, quietly gnawing at the edges of my contentment. It wasn't dissatisfaction, not really. It was restlessness. A sense that somehow life was slipping by, and I was only half awake for it. I brushed it off as fatigue or midlife musings. After all, who wouldn't feel overwhelmed managing kids, a demanding job, and a husband who expected me to always be the glue that held it all together? Looking back, I see now how much I took for granted. Mark was the type to bring me coffee in bed on lazy Sundays, to remember the little details, to leave handwritten notes in my lunch bag just because. It wasn't his fault that I started to feel invisible. We had grown comfortable, yes, but that comfort sometimes felt like a heavy blanket, stifling. It's not something you admit to yourself easily, let alone anyone else. Still, I clung to the life we'd built, reassuring myself that these feelings would pass. My intentions were never malicious, not even a little. But life, as it turns out, has a way of challenging the very foundations we think are unshakable. And soon enough, I'd learn how fragile my perfect world really was. 2015 was a year of reckoning. At 39, I stared at my reflection one morning and barely recognized the woman looking back. Somewhere between raising kids, keeping up with work demands, and playing the dutiful wife, I'd lost sight of myself. My clothes were tight, my energy was low, and my confidence non-existent. It wasn't vanity that spurred me into action. It was a deep, aching need to feel alive again, to find the spark I had buried under years of routine. The changes didn't happen overnight. I started small. Morning walks that turned into jogs, swapping late-night snacks for healthier choices. Slowly, the weight began to drop, and with it, the heaviness in my chest I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For the first time in years, I felt free. Like I was peeling back layers to reveal a version of myself I had forgotten existed. It was intoxicating. The compliments rolled in, first from friends and co-workers, then from strangers. I can't lie, it felt good. Better than good. It felt stimulating in a way I hadn't anticipated. Even Mark noticed, though his comments leaned more toward worry than admiration. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he'd say, or "You're perfect the way you are." I knew he meant well, but his words only fueled my determination. For once, I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing it for me. But as my confidence grew, so did the cracks in my carefully curated life. It wasn't just about the weight loss or the new clothes. It was about the satisfaction of rediscovering myself, of realizing I could be more. Yet, with every step forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was being left behind. Mark tried. I'll give him that. As I transformed, he made every effort to keep up, to remind me of the bond we'd built over 2 decades. Date nights became more frequent. He brought home flowers, planned weekend getaways, even started cooking dinner when he knew I'd had a long day. And yet, instead of pulling me closer, his gestures felt off. Like he was holding on to something that was already slipping through his fingers. I didn't mean to drift away, but it felt inevitable. As much as I appreciated his efforts, they seemed to highlight how disconnected we had become. Our conversations grew stilted, peppered with awkward silences. I noticed the way he looked at me, searching for the woman he'd always known. Except now, I wasn't sure if she still existed. He suggested therapy once. "Maybe we just need to talk to someone together," he said. His voice quiet but insistent. I bristled at the suggestion, brushing it off with excuses about time and money. The truth was, the idea of unpacking everything we had buried over the years felt exhausting. And maybe deep down I was scared of what we might find. The word intention kept echoing in my mind. What were we even trying to fix? Were we patching cracks in the foundation or just painting over them? I wanted to want him the way I once had, but the harder he tried, the more I felt myself retreating. It wasn't fair, I knew that. But fairness didn't seem to matter anymore. Something was shifting and I didn't know how, or if I could stop it. It started innocently enough. At least that's what I told myself at the time. When Andrew became the new manager at work, he brought an energy that was impossible to ignore. Confident but approachable, charming without trying too hard. He had a way of making you feel seen, like you were the only person in the room. For someone who had felt invisible for so long, that attention was a powerful thing. The compliments began casually. "You've got a sharp eye for detail," he'd say, or "You're always so composed under pressure." I knew better than to read into them, but the way he said my name, the way his gaze lingered just a second too long, it awakened something in me. I started looking forward to his visits to my office, to the easy banter we shared. At first, it was just talk. Long conversations that spilled over coffee breaks, texts about work that veered into personal territory. I told myself it was harmless, that I was in control. But there was an intention behind every word, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. He made me feel alive, like I was stepping into a version of myself I barely recognized but couldn't help loving. The shift from emotional to physical was almost imperceptible, as if we were crossing an invisible line neither of us acknowledged. When it happened, it felt inevitable, like a dam breaking after months of pressure. For 6 months, we existed in a world of stolen moments and whispered secrets, a world where nothing else mattered but the way he made me feel. I convinced myself it wasn't real, that it would pass. But deep down I knew the truth. This was a path I couldn't retrace. The moment Mark walked into the house that night, I knew. His expression wasn't anger. It was something deeper, sharper, as if the air itself had been stripped of oxygen. Andrew froze, his face draining of color as he stood in our living room, a place he had no right to be. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat, replaced by a silence that roared louder than any argument ever could. Mark's reaction was swift, visceral. Before I could stop him, he lunged at Andrew, his fists flying, fueled by betrayal and heartbreak. I screamed, begged him to stop, but it was like trying to hold back a hurricane. The noise, the chaos, the sound of breaking glass. It all blurred together in a storm of regret. This wasn't who Mark was. And yet, in that moment, it was as though the man I had known for 20 years no longer existed. When the police arrived, it felt like a surreal nightmare. Mark had called them himself, his hands trembling as he confessed what he'd done. They led him away in handcuffs, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. The pain in his gaze was unbearable, a reflection of everything I had destroyed. Andrew left too, slipping out like a ghost, leaving me alone in the wreckage of what used to be our home. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Broken furniture, shattered glass. Those could be replaced. But the look on Mark's face, the finality of that night, lingered like a scar. I had crossed a line, and there was no undoing it. As the front door closed behind him, a chilling realization set in. This wasn't just the end of the affair. It was the beginning of a collapse I hadn't prepared for. If I thought the worst was over, I was wrong. The days that followed were a cascade of rejection. Mark's family, once warm and inviting, shut me out completely. My parents were no different, their disappointment a heavy weight I couldn't escape. But the most painful blow came from my children, the very heart of my existence. Their anger wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quieter, colder, and far more cutting. "Why, Mom?" my eldest asked once, his voice trembling with restrained fury. I had no answer that could ease his pain, no justification that didn't sound hollow. They refused to look at me, refused to stay in the same room. My daughter, usually so tender-hearted, packed a bag and went to stay with Mark's parents, slamming the door on her way out. Andrew's betrayal added another layer of shame. He was married too, something he had conveniently failed to mention. When his wife confronted me, her words were sharp enough to cut through steel, leaving me hollowed out and defenseless. I had ruined not one family but two, and the weight of that realization was suffocating. Any illusion I had about this being a fleeting mistake was shattered. Every attempt I made to reach out, to apologize, was met with a wall of silence. My intentions to repair the damage seemed laughable in the face of the destruction I had caused. The home I once filled with love and laughter felt like a stranger's house now, empty, cold, and echoing with regrets. And the worst part, I couldn't blame anyone but myself. The trial was a spectacle, one I could barely bring myself to attend. Mark sat there, stoic but broken, as the prosecution painted him as a violent man. I wanted to scream that they were wrong, that this wasn't who he was. But what right did I have to defend him after everything I'd done? My presence in that courtroom felt like a betrayal all its own, a reminder of the storm I had unleashed. When the sentence came, 7 years, it felt like a death knell. The gasp from our son echoed in the silent room, followed by his quiet sobs. My daughter buried her face in her hands, and I could only sit there, paralyzed by guilt. Mark didn't look at me once, his focus fixed on the floor as if acknowledging me would shatter what little composure he had left. The consequences rippled far beyond that courtroom. His absence left a void that couldn't be filled, not in our children's lives, not in mine. Financial strain, emotional upheaval, sleepless nights, it all became our new reality. And then there was the lawsuit from Andrew's wife. Alienation of affection, she called it. The irony wasn't lost on me as I fought a losing battle to defend actions that had no defense. I tried to tell myself this was my punishment, that I deserved every ounce of the suffering I was experiencing. But watching my children bear the brunt of it was unbearable. They had lost their father to a prison cell, their mother to her own mistakes. And as much as I wanted to believe we could rebuild, the cracks seemed too deep to mend. The silence from my children was the most deafening part of it all. For years they refused to see me, to speak to me, to even acknowledge my existence. Every attempt I made, letters, phone calls, messages through mutual acquaintances, was met with cold indifference. My heart broke every time I saw their faces in photos posted by family, smiling as though I had never been a part of their lives. I remember standing outside my son's school once, hoping to catch a glimpse of him as he left. When he saw me, he turned and walked the other way. It was like a knife to the chest, a reminder of just how far I had fallen in their eyes. My intentions to reconnect, to explain, felt futile. They didn't want my apologies. They wanted the life they had before I shattered it. Even when they were old enough to understand the complexity of adult relationships, their anger didn't soften. "You chose him over us," my daughter said during one rare encounter, her voice steady but filled with pain. I tried to tell her it wasn't that simple, that I had made mistakes I regretted every day. But to her, and to her brother, my words were just empty excuses. I kept trying year after year, hoping that time would heal what I had broken. But every interaction felt like walking on glass, every rejection a fresh wound. The love I had once taken for granted now felt unreachable, like chasing a shadow that disappeared the moment I got close. And yet, despite it all, I couldn't give up. They were my children, my everything, and I owed it to them to keep trying. I used to think guilt was a fleeting emotion, something you could shake off with time. I know better now. It sits heavy, like a stone lodged in your chest, refusing to budge no matter how much you try to move past it. Therapy became my lifeline, a place to untangle the mess of my choices. I went in hoping to fix what was broken, but what I found was a mirror reflecting the truth I had avoided for years. I had been selfish, plain and simple. Every decision I made, every justification I clung to, had been about me. My needs, my desires, my dissatisfaction. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a complete disregard for the people I claimed to love most. That realization hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and ashamed. Even now, I struggle to make peace with the damage I caused. Therapy taught me to own my mistakes, to sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. But knowing I hurt my family beyond repair, that's a weight no amount of introspection can lift. The satisfaction of personal growth feels hollow when it comes at the expense of others. And yet, as much as I want to wallow in regret, I know that won't bring them back. My intentions now are focused on becoming someone my children might one day be willing to forgive. Whether that day comes or not, I can't say. But I owe it to them and to myself to try. Even if all I'm left with is the silence of an empty house, I have to believe that redemption is worth pursuing. Time has a way of moving on, even when you feel stuck in place. Mark, for all he endured, managed to rebuild his life after prison. He found solace in unexpected places, forming a bond with Andrew's ex-wife. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I couldn't begrudge him the companionship. He deserved happiness, something I had stolen from him so carelessly. Our children still orbit his world, visiting him regularly, sharing milestones I only hear about secondhand. The thought stings, but I've learned to live with it. I no longer expect calls on birthdays or holidays, though I send messages every year. It's not much, but it's the only connection I have left. Their forgiveness feels as distant now as it did in the aftermath of everything. The house feels quieter these days. My once busy life has narrowed to a routine of work, therapy, and reflection. I've made peace with some things. My mistakes, my guilt, but other wounds still feel fresh. I see reminders of my family everywhere. A forgotten toy in the attic, photos buried in drawers I can't bring myself to open. Do I hope for reconciliation? Of course, but I've stopped expecting it. My focus now is on becoming someone better, someone they might one day allow back into their lives. It's a slow, lonely road, but I walk it with intention. If nothing else, I owe them the effort. And if that's all I ever have, a quiet life lived in service of the people I love, it will have to be enough. Growing up, Dad was my hero. He wasn't just a father, he was a rock, the kind of man you could rely on no matter what. Watching him break the way he did, seeing the toll Mom's actions took on him, shattered something inside me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way it consumed him, changed him into someone I barely recognized. He never spoke ill of her, not once. Even after everything, he held himself with the kind of integrity I'll never forget. But you could see it in his eyes, the way he carried himself. He aged overnight, his laughter replaced by quiet sighs. And for years we watched him rebuild himself piece by piece, while Mom tried to pick up the pieces of her own mess. I don't hate her, but I don't understand her either. How could someone so smart, so loving, put their happiness above everything else? Above us. She says it wasn't intentional, but what else could it have been? Every decision she made felt like a choice against us, against the family we were. And that's something I'm not sure I can forgive. If she truly wants us back in her life, it's going to take more than apologies. She needs to stop chasing the past and start respecting where we are now. Maybe then we can talk. But for now, I'll stay where I am, close to Dad, far from her. It's not perfect, but it's the only way I know how to protect what little family we have left. Mom, if you're listening, I need you to hear this, really hear it. Dad isn't coming back. That chapter is closed, no matter how much you might wish otherwise. He's moved on, found peace in his own way, and I think you need to do the same. Clinging to what was will only keep you stuck. And honestly, it's exhausting for everyone involved. If you truly want to rebuild something with me and my sister, it can't come from a place of guilt or desperation. We've seen enough of that to last a lifetime. What I need is sincerity, effort, a willingness to accept the boundaries we've set, even if they're not what you hoped for. You can't force this, Mom. It has to happen naturally or not at all. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let go of the idea that things will ever go back to the way they were. They can't, and that's okay. What matters now is how we move forward, how we build something new from the wreckage. It won't be easy, and it might not look anything like the family we used to be. But if you want any chance of being part of our lives, you'll need to meet us where we are, not where you want us to be. This is the last thing I'll say. I don't hate you. I never have. But trust takes time, and forgiveness even longer. If you're patient, if you're willing to do the work, maybe one day we'll find a way back to each other. Until then, all I ask is that you respect the space we need to heal.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.